Ava Morgan's prosthetic leg clicked softly against the pavement as she passed the construction site. Laughter started before the words reached her. Looks like the circus lost an act. Her hands tightened around her duffel bag, face steady, the same look she wore through 3 combat tours and a silver star. She had survived far worse than their mockery. 15 minutes later, engines roared at the curb. 7 men stepped out with purpose, their presence shifting the air. By the time they reached her, the entire site had gone silent. This wasn't just about revenge. The SEALs came to restore respect, not deliver punishment, a moment that would linger long after the noise faded. Inside her apartment, Ava set down her duffel beside the single chair. The table held her medications, bottles lined up in a row, VA appointment cards taped above them in a neat column. She unclipped her prosthetic and leaned it against the nightstand, rubbing the red marks where the liner pressed into her skin. The habit was automatic, a small ritual to ease the ache that never fully left. Streetlight slanted through the blinds, striping the worn carpet. The mattress was topped with a single pillow and 2 blankets folded with the same precision she'd learned years ago. No photos, no flag. Only a small wooden box on the dresser, medals tucked away inside, untouched. The silence in the apartment pressed in, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the distant traffic outside. She sat by the window, elbows on knees, eyes tracing the shadows across the floor. The laughter from earlier still echoed in her mind. Not the words, but the pitch and rhythm of it. That sound people make when they think no one will answer back. She flexed her hands, remembering the feel of gauze soaked with someone else's blood, the way her fingers had moved fast and sure under fire. From the drawer, she pulled out her notebook. She scanned today's list, medical reminders, things to ask at her next VA appointment. At the bottom, she wrote 2 words: ignore better. It was her private instruction, a reminder to herself to let the noise slide past, to not let their words find a place to settle. The pen left a faint smudge as she closed the book. A siren wailed somewhere beyond the complex, fading as quickly as it rose. She counted seconds, a habit from years of listening for Dangaraleven, then quiet. For a moment, her mind flashed to another place, boots grinding dust into the floor of a tent, the air thick with heat and the metallic scent of blood. She pressed her palm to her thigh, feeling the phantom ache pulse, a reminder of what was gone but never far. Her duffel lay open, bandages folded next to her marine cap, the fabric soft from years of being handled. Beneath it, a brittle newspaper clipping. She didn't need to unfold it to see the headline or the photo. Her face smeared with dirt, standing beside a stretcher, the left boot already blood-soaked. She ran her thumb over the cap, tracing the eagle, globe, and anchor stitched into the bill, the threads worn nearly bare. Downstairs, a car door slammed, followed by the rattle of a skateboard on concrete. The world outside went on, ordinary and unbothered. She drew in a slow breath, counting to 4, then let it out. The exercise was supposed to help, though mostly it just made her chest feel tight. Her phone buzzed, a reminder for her VA check-in. She silenced it, watching the screen fade to black. Her reflection caught in the glass dark circles under her eyes, the pale scar running along her jaw. She set the phone aside, but a low, unfamiliar rumble in the distance caught her attention, different from the usual city sounds. She reached for the cap in her bag, fingers tracing the frayed stitching, the weight of memory settling in her palm as the silence deepened. Ava set the cap on her knee, the fabric soft from years of sweat and sun. The eagle, globe, and anchor were stitched in gold thread, now dulled and frayed at the edges. She pressed her thumb over the emblem, feeling each raised stitch familiar, grounding. The cap had seen 2 tours and 3 firefights, stuffed into a cargo pocket or jammed under her belt. It never left her duffel for long, even though she hadn't worn it in years. She kept it close, a last piece of her life in uniform, the part she never spoke about to anyone. The prosthetic leaned against the nightstand, carbon fiber webbing catching a faint line of light from the blinds. The foot was worn along the edge, the result of favoring one side on uneven ground. Each step brought that measured clicker sound Ava had learned to trust. Sometimes, she caught people turning at the noise, their eyes tracing her stride, their questions unspoken but obvious. Teenagers at the store mimicked the rhythm, thinking she couldn't hear. Kids stared openly or asked blunt questions when they thought she wasn't listening. To them, the click was strange, something to point out or laugh at. To her, it was a sign she was still moving forward. She unfolded the cap, tracing the faded imprint of her service number along the sweatband. Years ago, that number had echoed over a radio while she dragged a bleeding seal 3 times under fire. She remembered the heat, the grit, the weight of another life in her arms. The cap had soaked up oil, sand, and blood, its fabric holding the memory of that day more than any medal ever could. The silver star and purple heart were tucked away in a box, unseen, but the cap stayed with her quiet, battered, and real. Ava set the cap on the windowsill and flexed her leg, checking for new pressure marks. She'd grown used to the questions, the stares, the way Cashier's eyes dropped to her jeans and lingered. She never changed her pace. The click was her rhythm, her reminder that she'd survived what most people couldn't imagine. Let them look. She didn't owe them an explanation. Her phone buzzed a VA notification, another sleep study reminder. She ignored it, picking up the cap again, thumbs smoothing the bent bill. She could almost hear Logan's voice, see his grin through the dust after a firefight. "Hell of a good luck charm," he'd said, tossing the cap back to her. Now it was just fabric, but she kept it anyway. The click of her prosthetic and the weight of the cap were hearse proof of what she'd carried and what she'd lost. Outside, voices drifted up from the street. Someone shouted, laughter rising and fading. Ava closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the city's pulse, the steady click of memory and routine. Unseen, across the street, another set of eyes watched her window, tracking the pattern of her evenings. The city moved on, but something in the air had shifted, waiting for the next moment to unfold. Rick tossed his crowbar onto a stack of plywood, the clang sharp enough to draw glances from the crew. He wiped his hands on stained coveralls, eyes fixed on Ava as she walked past the chain-link fence. "Free leg courtesy of Uncle Sam," he called. Laughter erupted by the cement mixer. One of the younger guys, maybe 19, with raw scabs on his knuckles, pulled out his phone and angled it toward Ava. "Gonna call this one RoboCop at the welfare office," he said, thumb poised over the record button. Ava didn't slow. She gripped her duffel strap until the leather pressed ridges into her palm, shoulders set, gaze forward. She walked the same way she had past jeering crowds overseas, counting each breath, focusing on the rhythm of her steps. Their laughter followed her, sharp and mean, but she kept moving. None of them knew about the weight she'd carried, the 90 pounds of gear, the blood that soaked through her uniform, the radio static in her ear as she called for help. The men behind the fence saw only the surface, never the story. A pickup idled near the entrance, engine rumbling over the noise. Javier Ruiz sat behind the wheel, cigarette burning low. He'd been out of the teams for years, but old habits lingered. He watched Ava's stride, the careful shift of weight, the deliberate pace. He recognized the walk. He'd seen it on medics who'd carried others through chaos, their bodies marked by what they'd survived. The kid with the phone stepped closer, zooming in on Ava's leg. "Yo, does it come off?" he shouted, his voice carrying over the generator's drone. The foreman, perched on a forklift, just smirked and said nothing. No one on the crew intervened. They watched, some amused, some indifferent, each assuming someone else would step in if things went too far. The bystander effect played out in real-time responsibility, diffusing across the crowd until it vanished. Javier flicked his cigarette out the window, fingers already reaching for his phone as the kid called out, "Hey, Legolas, run that by us again." He dialed without looking away. "Logan," he said when the line picked up. "That medic from Fallujah, the one who pulled you out. They're laughing at her leg." 1,700 miles away, Logan Beck set down his wrench in a quiet garage. He flexed his scarred hand, remembering the day Ava worked on him under fire. "Where?" he asked. Javier gave him the intersection and added, "Same walk, same look." He didn't need to say more. Ava waited at the crosswalk, the teen's phone still trained on her. "Check out her robo-leg," he narrated, voice eager for the camera. No one corrected him. The foreman lit a cigar, eyes on the horizon, as if none of this mattered. For the crew, it was just another day. For Ava, it was another reminder of how easily cruelty could find an audience, and how quickly that audience could become complicit by doing nothing. Javier watched as Ava crossed the street, her prosthetic clicking in time with her steps. The laughter faded behind her, but the phone kept recording, ready for an audience far beyond the job site. He stayed at the curb, watching, waiting, the call still echoing in his ear. A block away, black SUVs began to appear, moving with purpose through the afternoon traffic. Logan Beck ended the call and set his phone aside. The garage was quiet, except for the tick of cooling metal. He looked down at his hands scarred, steady, the same hands Ava Morgan had stitched up in a makeshift aid station while mortars rattled the ground outside. He remembered the way she'd worked, methodical and unflinching, ignoring her own wound until everyone else was out of danger. Now, hearing her name again, there was no need for questions. Mike Kowalski was halfway into an engine block when Logan spoke. "It's Morgan." That was all it took. Mike wiped his hands on his shirt, the grease streaking across faded cotton. He didn't need to ask which Morgan. There was only one. The memory of Fallujah was never Farava dragging two men through dust and gunfire, her leg torn open, never hesitating. Mike nodded once. "Where?" Logan gave him the intersection, and that was enough. Trevor Hayes didn't hesitate either. He tossed his wrench into the tray, grabbed his keys, and was already heading for the door. There was a rhythm to these moments, no debate, just movement. Each man understood what was at stake. Ava had risked everything for them once. Now it was their turn to answer. Javier's text came through, a shaky video of Ava walking past the fence, voices jeering, a phone camera zooming in on her prosthetic. Logan's jaw tightened. He remembered the same leg giving out under Ava as she hauled Mike to safety, the blood soaking through her pants, her hands never losing their grip. Seeing that leg mocked by people who knew nothing of sacrifice made something old and protective rise up in him. Within minutes, the team was in motion. Trevor coordinated with two more veterans, arranging a meeting point near the site. Mike checked the trunk of his Carno weapons, just a few tools and a folded flag. Carlos Menendez left his kitchen mid-dinner, apron still on, the call enough to pull him away from family without a word of explanation. They all moved with purpose, the kind that came from years of shared understanding. Logan took the lead SUV, the clock on the dash reading just after 2:30. He pressed his palm to the steering wheel, feeling the scar tissue pull. The memory of Ava's hands tying off a suture, her voice calm in chaos, replayed in his mind. There was never any ceremony with her, just the next wounded, the next job. That was the standard. On the drive, Carlos's voice came over the radio. "Uniforms?" Logan shook his head, not needing the show. "Standard honors," he said. That meant presence, not intimidation. The message was about respect, not retribution. Mike pulled up a site map, marking entrances and exits. Trevor scanned police bands, listening for any sign of trouble. Every detail mattered, just like it had overseas. They would handle this with discipline, no escalation, just a statement. Javier's voice came through again, calm and clear. "She's 2 blocks west." Crew's still talking. Logan glanced at his team in the mirror. No one needed direction. Each man carried the same look, quiet resolve. As they approached the site, the street narrowed. Orange cones flanked the entrance, scaffolding rising above the fence. Javier's truck idled across the way, hazard lights blinking. Logan eased the SUV to a stop, blocking the gate. Doors opened in sequence. The team stepped out, moving together, silent and focused. Ava was visible down the block, duffel on her shoulder, her walk steady and familiar. The team advanced toward the fence, boots crunching gravel. There were no speeches, no show of force. Just a line of men, standing where it mattered. The site's noise faded as their presence settled in, a pause hanging in the air waiting for what would happen next. The air compressor fell quiet. A nail gun dangled from its hose, forgotten. Heads turned toward the gate where dust drifted around 7 pairs of boots, each step deliberate, each man's face unreadable. Rick Tanner's clipboard slipped from his fingers and hit the concrete. He stared, not moving, jaw slack. Logan Beck led the way, crossing the same stretch of gravel where, less than half an hour before, Ava Morgan had walked through their taunts. She stood at the curb now, adjusting her duffel, only turning when she sensed the sudden change. For a moment she froze, then recognized the men stepping toward her. The SEALs fanned out behind Logan, forming a loose arc. Their sleeves were rolled, tattoos visible, but there was no threat in their posture, just the unmistakable discipline of men who had trained together, survived together. The teenager who'd filmed Ava earlier shoved his phone into his pocket, the screen still lit with half-formed video. Logan halted 3 paces from Ava. His salute was sharp, precise elbow up, wrist straight, fingers aligned. The gesture was unmistakable, impossible to ignore. Ava inhaled, her face steady. Behind Logan, 6 more salutes rose in perfect sync, each one crisp, each one deliberate. No one spoke. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of asphalt. Ava's grip on her duffel tightened. She didn't return the salute. Been out too long, but her shoulders straightened, her stance settling into the quiet strength she'd carried since the day she'd reported to the triage tent, 2 wounded men in tow. Logan's voice cut the silence. "Sergeant Morgan, permission to stand with you?" His words carried just far enough, the tone respectful, the meaning clear. The foreman started to object, but Mike Kowalski's eyes met his, and he stopped short. Behind him, a welder set his torch aside, gaze fixed on the scene unfolding. Ava studied Logan's face, the scar near his temple, the lines that hadn't been there before. She exhaled. Granted. The SEALs moved in, 3 taking up quiet positions behind her, the rest facing outward. Logan stood at her right, the spot reserved for a trusted wingman. Above, a crane operator leaned from his cab. Workers on the platforms paused, tools in hand, watching. No one on the crew moved. The teenager who'd filmed wiped his palms on his jeans, ignoring his buzzing phone. Ava stood still, letting the moment stretch. 4 years since anyone had offered her a salute. 4 years since her service had been recognized by more than a passing phrase at the grocery store. A riveter clattered to the ground near the scaffolding, echoing through the stillness. Logan's salute remained, unwavering. This wasn't about the men on the site, or about payback. It was about respect, a debt owed, and finally acknowledged. Across the street, Javier Ruiz watched from his truck, phone recording. He didn't need to join. The moment spoke for itself. The foreman tried to speak again, but Carlos Menendez silenced him with a look, the kind that needed no words. The crew shifted, uneasy, eyes on the ground. Ava shifted her weight, her prosthetic clicking against the pavement. The sound rang out, but no one laughed now. A crow landed on the fence, tilting its head at the quiet. Down the block, a car alarm chirped twice, then stopped. Logan lowered his salute. The others followed, hands dropping in practiced unison. The tension didn't break. It settled, thick and heavy. Rick Tanner bent to retrieve his clipboard, fingers leaving damp marks. The teenager zipped his hoodie, suddenly aware of the chill. Ava adjusted her duffel, silent. She nodded to Logan. Nothing more needed to be said. 7 men turned in step behind her as she started down the sidewalk. Behind them, a whispered question hung in the air. "Who is she?" No answer came. The only trace left was the line of boot prints pressed into the dirt, marks that would fade, but a moment that wouldn't be forgotten. As they moved away from the site, the crowd's attention lingered, drawn not by spectacle, but by the quiet gravity of what they'd witnessed. Logan stepped forward, his hand open, palm up. Resting in the center was a challenge coin solid brass, the seal trident stamped deep, edges worn smooth from years in someone's pocket. Sunlight caught the metal, a glint that lasted only a second. Ava looked at it, then at Logan. He didn't smile or explain. He just waited, steady as ever. "You earned this years ago," he said. The words were quiet, matter of fact. No ceremony, No speech, just the simple truth. When he dropped the coin into her palm, it felt heavier than she expected. Not just the weight of the brass, but the years behind it. She closed her fingers around it and remembered the medic tent outside Fallujah, Logan gripping her wrist as she finished the last suture, the thanks in his eyes that never made it to his mouth. The construction crew behind them shifted, boots scraping the dirt. The teenager who'd filmed earlier pulled his hood up, shrinking smaller. No one said a word. Ava pressed her thumb into the trident's ridges, feeling the sharp lines bite into her skin. She'd seen seal coins before once, handed to a Marine who'd held a bridge alone, once to a corpsman who'd kept a 50 cal running after the gunner fell. They were rare, never given lightly. Now one was hers. Logan stepped back, the others holding their positions. Their attention was on Ava, not the crew. They remembered her as the medic who'd dragged their brothers out of chaos, who'd refused morphine until the last casualty was safe. The respect in their silence was unmistakable. Ava loosened her grip and glanced down. Someone had etched coordinates into the coin's back: 33.5213 degrees N, 43.3082 degrees E, Fallujah. She closed her fist again, holding the memory close. Wind picked up dust from the site. Carlos, standing nearby, shifted to block the worst of it from Ava's face. It was the kind of small, practiced move that only made sense to people who'd spent time in places where sand found every cut. Her prosthetic clicked as she adjusted her stance. The sound was different. Now no one flinched. No one smirked. The foreman started to speak, but Mike Kowalski's look ended it before it began. This wasn't about apologies or explanations. It was about the coin in Ava's hand and everything it meant. She slipped the coin into her pocket. The metal warmed instantly against her leg. She glanced toward the bus stop, her route unchanged, but the weight on her shoulder felt lighter. Logan fell in beside her, the others following at a respectful distance. As they neared the curb, the usual city noise returned: tools clattering, a car horn, the shuffle of people waiting for the bus. The SEALs didn't offer farewells. They just nodded, the kind of nod that passes understanding without words. Ava flexed her fingers around the coin, feeling its outline through the fabric. She wouldn't put it on a shelf. Some things were meant to be carried. The bus hissed to a stop. Logan spoke quietly, "Next time," and she answered with a nod. She climbed aboard, prosthetic clicking on the first step, the coin resting against her thigh. The bus pulled away, leaving the site behind, but something had shifted, small, but real. And as the day went on, that shift would begin to ripple out in ways no one there could have predicted. At the construction site, something subtle but unmistakable began to shift. The new policy was impossible to ignore: laminated signs taped to every breakroom door, every porta potty, spelling out in black Helvetica, "Disrespect a veteran, you're done." Workers repeated the rule to each other, some with a smirk, most with a new kind of caution. Rick Tanner, the foreman whose words had started it all, was reassigned to an inventory trailer miles away, his name quietly erased from the job site roster. Days passed. Ava didn't plan to return, but a wrong turn after a VA appointment brought her back past the site. The kid who'd filmed her before was on concrete duty, hands caked with dust. He didn't laugh this time. He just nodded toward the entrance. "They put something up for you." Near the gate, a single brick stood out from the rest set higher, framed in steel. "Scout, Morgan, laser, etched above a Marine Corps emblem, fresh mortar, still bright around the edges." Ava ran her thumb over the letters, feeling the groove. A worker in coveralls stepped up, wiping grout from his hands. "We voted on where it should go," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Most wanted it here, so everyone sees it, every day." A truck idled at the curb. The driver, the same man who'd called Logan, leaned out. Foreman's kid did the engraving. Took him 3 tries to get the emblem right. The breeze carried the smell of cut rebar and wet concrete. The kid at the mixer watched, trowel hanging at his side. This time, there was no laughter, only silence. The driver spoke again, quieter. "My son's school is having an assembly. About respect. He was born without a left forearm, gets picked on. He looked at the brick, then away. Ava traced the mortar lines, straight and even. She didn't say much, but the message was clear. On Tuesday, she stood in a school auditorium, jeans and a plain black tee, prosthetic visible. The room smelled of floor wax and sanitizer. Kids whispered, teachers shushed them. She held up Logan's coin, letting the light catch it. Different isn't broken, she said. It's just a different kind of strong. In the front row, a boy with one arm let his sleeve hang loose, not bothering to hide it. Back at the site, the ritual grew. Workers touched the brick before their shifts, some with a tap, some with a full palm. The superintendent watched, didn't interfere. By the end of the month, 3 more disabled veterans had joined the crew. At the high school, the new Veterans Club tripled in size. The boy from the assembly tried out for baseball, balancing the bat against his stump. His coach ordered a custom glove after seeing him throw. Every Friday, the crew hosted lunch for local vets, burgers, sodas, folding tables by the gate. The kid who'd once filmed Ava now served the drinks, always remembering her Coke with 3 ice cubes. One afternoon, a baseball appeared on Ava's doorstep, the seams worn, signatures faded. She brought it to a Little League game. The boy's face lit up when she tossed it to him. His teacher, who doubted him, watched as he threw a perfect strike from second base. That night, masons at the site worked late, setting a second plaque below Ava's brick. It listed names and places. Fallujah, Sangin, Houston with 1 line left blank. No one asked what would fill it. The work continued, quiet and steady, as if the story was still being written. The next week, a different set of chairs waited in a school auditorium. Ava stood backstage, listening to the low hum of voices and the buzz of fluorescent lights, ready to face a new kind of quiet. Ava stepped onto the stage, the microphone standing between her and the rows of students. She hadn't written a speech. There was nothing rehearsed in the way she stood, hands loose, Logan's challenge coin pressing a steady weight in her pocket. The auditorium was full, students shifting in their chairs, teachers lined up along the walls, the air thick with the scent of floor wax and pencil shavings. She started with what she knew, the heaviness of 60 pounds of gear, the ache in her shoulders from straps digging in during patrols, the way every buckle left a mark. She described sand, how it found its way into boots, IV bags, even the seams of bandages. The students listened, sneakers still against the floor, as she spoke about the ordinary discomforts that came before the extraordinary losses. Her voice stayed even as she talked about the day she lost her leg. Not the explosion, but the quiet afterward, lying on her back, staring at the sky, realizing her body was different, and her mind couldn't yet catch up. She didn't mention medals, didn't talk about heroics. Instead, she told them about learning to walk again, the parallel bars in rehab that felt more like prison gates, the way her therapist had to remind her to breathe between each step. She talked about coming home, how people stared, how some asked too many questions, and others wouldn't look at her at all. She described the challenge of finding a rhythm again, not just in walking but in ordinary life, grocery shopping, waiting in line, looking for work. No one in the room whispered or shifted. The silence was careful, attentive. Ava glanced at the front row, where a boy with a prosthetic arm sat with his mother. He watched her, sleeve pinned up, eyes wide and unblinking. She spoke directly to him, but her words carried to everyone. Different isn't broken. It's just a different kind of strong. She let her prosthetic click against the podium as she shifted her weight. No one laughed. She finished by describing the brick at the construction site, how workers touched it before their shifts now, a small ritual that meant more than any plaque or speech. She said nothing about the men who'd stood with her that day, only that respect can be quiet, and it can last. When she stopped, the applause was slow at first, then grew. Students stood, some wiping their eyes. Teachers joined in, their faces open and unguarded. The principal met her by the water fountain, his handshake firm. He asked her to join the school's anti-bullying task force, said her story needed to be heard again and again. Ava agreed. but only if she could choose the topics, only if the stories stayed honest. As the students filed out, a few lingered. One girl with a scar on her cheek waited by the trophy case, shifting from foot to foot until Ava approached. She wanted to know about running shoes, about joining the Marines. Others gathered, asking about training, about starting over. Ava answered each question, her prosthetic clicking on the tile as she walked with them toward the exit. Outside, the late sun caught the metal of the bike racks. Some students lingered, watching her, the boy with the prosthetic arm among them. Ava paused, sensing a different kind of attention, one that wasn't about pity or curiosity, but about possibility. The conversation wasn't finished. Something new waited just beyond the doors, ready to begin. Miguel waited by the bike racks, backpack slung over one shoulder, his left sleeve pinned where his arm ended just below the elbow. He watched as Ava gathered her things at the podium, his sneaker tracing circles in the dust. When she looked up, he stepped forward, meeting her eyes with a steady, unblinking gaze. Most kids his age looked at her prosthetic first. Miguel didn't. "My teacher says I can't play baseball," he said, voice low but certain. In the background, a handful of older boys tossed a football, their laughter sharp. One called out, "Hey, one-arm Joe, wanna try catching?" Miguel's face stayed calm. Ava crouched, her prosthetic knee clicking. She reached into her duffel, past the familiar jumble of medical tape and spare liners, and pulled out a baseball, its leather worn and seams darkened by years of handling. The signatures had faded, but were still there, reminders of the Marines she'd watched play on a sandlot in Kuwait. She held it out to Miguel. He hesitated, then took the ball, turning it over in his hand, tracing the ink with his thumb. "Tell your teacher this is for you," Ava said. Miguel nodded, holding the ball close. The group by the football stopped to watch, their game forgotten. Wind tugged at Miguel's pinned sleeve. He looked at Ava's leg, then back at the ball. "You really played?" he asked. Ava smiled, tapping the faint scar on her lip. "Caught a line drive with my teeth once. Split my lip open." Miguel's eyes widened, a quick grin breaking through. The school counselor approached, shoes clicking on the pavement. "Miguel, let's not bother our guest." Ava stood, the joint in her knee popping. "We were talking about adaptive batting techniques," she said. Miguel gripped the ball tighter, as if it might be taken away. The counselor paused, noticing the signatures. One of the football boys stepped forward. "Miguel, we got practice Sunday. You coming?" Miguel looked at Ava. She gave him a nod, the kind she'd given young Marines facing their first real test. "Yeah," he said. "I'm coming." That night, Ava's phone chimed with an email from Miguel's mom. Attached was a photo. Miguel asleep, the baseball tucked under his chin, his arm draped protectively over it. The message read, he called it his medal. A few days later, the gym teacher reached out for advice on adaptive sports. By week's end, the school board approved a mentorship program for disabled athletes. Ava sent along resources and contacts, choosing to help from the sidelines. Miguel's next message included a shaky video. He stood at home plate, gripping the bat one-handed, balancing it against the end of his left arm. The pitch came in wild. Miguel swung late but hard, the crack of the ball echoing across the field. Someone cheered, "Run, one-arm Joe." But this time, the words sounded different. Encouragement, not mockery. Ava watched the video more than once. She saw Miguel rounding second, sleeve flapping, face split with a wide grin. The boy who'd once doubted his place on the field now ran toward home, teammates cheering him on. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Ava would feel the baseball's weight in her baga, reminder that the smallest gestures could ripple outward, changing more than just one afternoon. And as she passed the construction site, she noticed the brick with her name, its surface already touched by new hands, the story still unfolding in small, steady ways. A year after the first brick was set, the memorial wall had grown. The engraved stones lined the edge of the construction site, each one bearing a name, a date, or a unit insignia. Some were simple, just initials and a campaign. Others carried the marks of hard-won recognition, Purple Heart, Silver Star, Navy Cross. The wall was never planned as a monument, but it became one all the same, shaped by the hands that built it and the stories that brought people back to touch the names. Ava stood beside the wall early one morning, her fingers tracing the softened edges of her own brick. The sun caught on the Marine Corps emblem, shining for a moment before dust from the lot settled over everything again. Behind her, the site moved with its usual rhythm machines starting up, voices calling measurements, the steady slap of boots on gravel. Rick Tanner approached with 2 coffees, his hard hat now marked with a new badge. Veteran Liaison. He handed her a cup, black, no sugar. He remembered the details now. He nodded toward the latest addition to the wall of fresh brick, its engraving still sharp. Junior Crew put that one in last week. Capel Walters, USMC. The wall had become a record, each new name, a reminder that service didn't end when the uniform came off. Rick wiped dust from his hands, jeans cleaner than they'd been a year ago. We've got 3 amputees working here now. That new electrician she lost her arm outside Mosul. She asked about you. His voice was steady, no longer uncertain around words like IED or combat. Ava just nodded, watching as the electrician adjusted her prosthetic and climbed the scaffolding, moving with a practiced ease that drew no special attention. The changes at the site went deeper than the wall. Sensitivity trainings were part of every new hire's orientation. Jokes that once slipped by unchallenged now stopped short. Rick led the sessions himself, speaking plainly about respect and the cost of careless words. The zero-tolerance policy for harassment was more than a poster, it was enforced, and everyone knew it. Ava noticed the difference in the way workers greeted her, in the way they watched out for each other. The culture had shifted, not overnight, but in quiet, steady increments. School groups visited the site, teachers pointing out the memorial and asking students to think about what it meant. Sometimes veterans came from out of town, detouring just to see the wall, to run their hands over the bricks and leave small tokensa patch, a coin, a folded note. The wall became a place where stories were exchanged, sometimes out loud, sometimes in silence. Ava listened more than she spoke, her presence enough for those who needed to see themselves reflected in the world around them. As the morning wore on, a minivan pulled up in the lot. Middle schoolers spilled out, clipboards in hand, their teacher corralling them toward the wall. One boy broke away, running ahead to press his palm against Ava's name. He lingered, reading the letters, before rejoining his group. Rick watched, a smile hidden behind his coffee cup. Ava stayed until the last student touched the wall. The electrician finished her shift, wiping sweat from her brow, and nodded as she passed. Rick mentioned the upcoming VFW annex, asking if Ava would be there when they poured the foundation. She agreed, adjusting her duffel on her shoulder, the marine cap clipped to the strap. The gate swung shut behind them, the wall standing quiet at the edge of the site. The day's work continued, but something lasting remained in the brick and mortar record of what had changed, and of what was still possible. Some stories linger long after the crowd has moved on. Ava's journey isn't defined by the moment of mockery, but by what followed the boy who learned to swing a bat his own way, the foreman who now teaches new hires to pause before they speak, the brick smoothed by hands searching for courage. Honor grows quietly, not given by medals, but by the choices people make each day. Think about those around you who move through life unseen: the veteran in line at the store, the kid who sits alone at lunch, the coworker who never talks about old injuries. Their stories are waiting for someone to notice. If this story made you reflect on what respect looks like, consider subscribing for more. Share below how you've witnessed dignity in action.